Hello, everyone. Welcome to Laser Focus. This is the deep dive pop culture podcast from Nerdist. My name is Kyle Anderson. Thank you for listening. This week, my guest is somebody I've known for a very long time. He and I used to make videos together on a different, now defunct platform.
Yep.
You can still find those videos, which we will talk about momentarily. You can still find those videos on YouTube if you feel like looking at me 12 years younger. Was that
Almost
like that
10.
long ago?
Almost 10.
Almost 10. Okay.
Yeah. So not quite a junior high schooler, but in the ballpark.
Yeah, definitely. And everyone will just bask at how completely different I look. I look exactly the same.
You look exactly the same.
Except my hairline is drastically worse now. Anyway, that voice you have heard, he's about to move and change careers entirely. So he is late of Film Independent. He also was a producer for My Damn Channel back in the day, which is where we used to make videos. And you can catch his brand new debut feature film, Delicate Arch, if you are in Los Angeles at the Dances with Films Festival. It's screening Friday, June 28th. And you can, we'll plug that at the end too. But thank you and welcome, Matt Warren. Hey, buddy.
Hey, man. So when I emailed you for this, I wasn't sure if only Nerdist people were allowed on this show. And I was like, hey, let me come on your show. Because I've secretly been wanting to do it ever since you started this new podcast.
Okay.
So
Sure.
I'm like,
well, as everybody who knows,
I didn't want to impose
listens,
until I had something that benefited me, frankly, to talk about.
I have had people who shall go nameless that I have known for a while who go, "Oh, hey, you're doing a new podcast? Let me be on it." Like with before the first episode even dropped, I was like, "Okay, well, I'm not getting back to you. You clearly are only in this for yourself." But no, you waited a long time. We have other guests. We have people who aren't in the Nerdist sphere, so I'm happy to have you on. Also, just be nice to talk to you about. We're going to be talking our main focus this episode is going to be about the James Bond franchise, which Matt and I have bonded over many, many times. Let's start with your. Go ahead.
Many unrecorded conversations about James Bond, and we might as well
just
replay all those now. Just run it back, just on mic this time.
Yeah, I tape all of our conversations anyway,
so
good. It'll be really easy to on a reel to reel under my desk. Matt, let's talk about Delicate Arch real fast. It doesn't have to be fast. This is a movie that I read an early script of several years ago, I think at this point. You asked me to read it, and then you were in production last year or the year before. Was it 22 or 23 that you were in production?
It was 22, actually. So we filmed it in essentially November, right up kind of between Halloween and Thanksgiving, basically, in 2022. So we kind of squeezed it right in between those two holidays, and I've basically spent the last 12 months in change in post, and it's finally completed, and it finally has like a festival premiere date, like you said, at the Dances with Films Festival here in Hollywood in just a couple of weeks, and we're really excited about it.
Yeah, it's your first feature, but it's at the Chinese theater. I mean, it's not the big Chinese theater, but still, it's at the Chinese theater, which is pretty cool. You could say you had your premiere at the Chinese theater.
Yeah, no, that definitely flitted across my mind. I mean, we'd all love to be in like the 800-seat Oppenheimer theater or whatever.
Yeah.
But I don't even know what my movie would look like blown up to that big. I don't know. I don't know much about DCPs and resolution and all that stuff. I feel like it would just kind of look like a low quality GIF or something if you tried to stretch it to that dimension. But yeah, we're thrilled. I've seen so many good movies at that theater over the years, like The Human Centipede 3 and Hop.
Sure.
And other masterpieces. So
that was a weird double feature.
Yeah. A shared universe. They're building towards a shared universe. I think they're both properties are owned by Disney now. So,
they'll own Delicate Arch soon.
Oh God, I would love that. I would love. I would.
Sell out.
I'm available to sell out so hard. I'm just begging the universe to present me with like a catalog of commercial opportunities for this film. I'll play it like on those little monitors at gas stations, like whatever. I just need money very badly.
That took a dark turn, but but speaking of dark turns, your film is sort of an existential kind of almost cosmic thriller horror pseudo science fiction piece about four stoners out in the desert of Utah, and losing their minds, and also film being like blurred in. I've seen it a couple times, and it's a I really enjoyed it. I mean, this, I've told you this already, but it's also like it's a hard movie to try to explain, I think, because it's an easy movie to set the premise of, which is just four stoners go out into the desert, but it's a hard movie to kind of explain the vibe of if you're not already watching it. How have you, in your years of trying to sell this movie, not years, but you know what I mean? Like, how have you described it in your logline form?
It's funny. Like, this is a movie I wrote and got all the way made and to a film festival without ever really coming up with a satisfactory logline for it, or like an easy way to pitch it or describe it. But essentially, it is about four college students from Salt Lake City, which is where I grew up, who are escaping a sort of ecological disaster up in that part of the state. And so they flee to the southern part of the state and just decide to make it a weekend with like a fun camping trip. And then once they sort of get there, eerie things start to happen and their reality breaks down, particularly like once they start taking some mushrooms and partying a little bit. The sort of nature of their reality gets blurred a little bit. And one of the characters is a film student who is using the time in the desert to make a short film for a film challenge, and then sort of the lines between what is constructed and what is real to the participants gets blurred a little bit. And so even that's like a very concise version, but it gets a little more sprawling from there.
Yeah, it's a really fun movie. It's very funny as well. But once it kind of takes the turn toward the eerie and the otherworldly, I think it's something. I mean, you said like for people who like, blah blah blah. Like I can't even remember some of the movies you posted, but they were like there's some very diverse movies in your list of movies that it's like. But I think that's all correct. Like I think you mentioned Annihilation, sort of, and which is a favorite movie of mine.
Yeah, mine too. Yeah, but I also put like Tucker and Dale versus Evil on there.
Oh, sure.
And The Cabin in the Woods is a comparison. I've heard from people, and I love that movie. I know not everyone does. But it was originally supposed to be more of a horror comedy, but it didn't end up being quite as funny as I think I intended it to or at least envisioned it when I was writing. It ended up being a little bit more intense, which I'm totally fine with. I was kind of surprised with the movie we walked out of there with when all was said and done. But I think it's still funny, and that mostly comes from our cast, who are a bunch of really great performers, most of whom have like UCB comedy training and all that.
I think if you wanted it to be more of a comedy, your score should have been blink 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 blink, and that would have helped a lot, I think.
Can I sample that and have have our composer like loop that and mix that? That's great. We'll do that for the DVD re-release.
Perfect. Which of course you're going to get a DVD release, not a Blu-ray or anything else.
No, it's going to be available on Laserdisc.
Oh, I don't even I can't even believe that they thought that was going to last. They're like, what if the disc was enormous? That's probably going to be the best way to do it.
Well,
and you have to
what was
flip
that
it
like in
halfway
the
through.
80s?
I guess.
It was in the 80s. Well, they were the size of LPs, right? So it was kind of like an attempt to LP a size film watching, or at least
Yeah.
acquisition or
The only Laserdisc,
exhibition.
the only Laserdisc I ever watched was like an educational kind of interactive thing that was in my like 5th grade class. They like
Was it
wheeled
about
in a TV.
hygiene?
I don't remember. I don't think it was about hygiene. I think it was like
No, that's a disappointment.
I don't actually remember, but I do remember it was like this huge disc, and then they had to flip it, and there was like a point where like it would say teachers pause, and then we would discuss things and stuff like that. But it's literally the only laser disc I've ever watched. Everything else I went directly from VHS to DVD.
Yeah, I think that was. I think laser discs were spoken of but never glimpsed.
Yeah.
As far as I can recall.
But it's so funny if you go back and listen to like old Criterion channel or Criterion Collection commentary tracks. Like they were producing laser discs like very early on. Like one of the ones that I remember is watching I think it was the commentary track for Chasing Amy, maybe, which was at one point on the Criterion Collection. And Kevin Smith says F DVD, Laserdisc forever, right at the beginning, which is, boy, that has not aged well.
Yeah. And then remember when he said like F podcasts, and I'll never do a podcast, and I'll never have a Patreon. This was decades before any of those existed.
Yep.
And
people didn't even know what he was talking about.
Yeah. He's a time traveler and also a hypocrite.
Yeah. And you can put that in writing. Here's some fun trivia that is only fun because we're talking about formats. Do you know the very first movie to ever be on DVD?
I don't. I think I know what the last movie ever on VHS was, though.
Okay, that was my next question. What's that?
Is it A History of Violence?
It is A History of Violence. David Cronenberg's A History of Violence from 2003 was the very last VHS produced. The very first DVD produced was Twister.
Oh, okay.
What's the first DVD you owned?
First DVD, God, what was it? I think it was Amazon Women on the Moon or From the Moon. That 80s. It's like John Landis and I think some other filmmakers. It was like just a bunch of sketches and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely remember that movie.
It was like I think it was like a sort of a follow up to Kentucky Fried Movie.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, that's oddly sticking in my mind as an early DVD purchase.
That's this brand new platform. Let's get a comedy, a very small comedy.
Yeah, I wanted to see the Don Nozzle Simmons sketch in the greatest mastering possible.
My parents bought a DVD player, which must have been in the early maybe 2000 or 2001. The first 3 DVDs they bought were The Matrix, The Sixth Sense, and Eyes Wide Shut. What a mix!
What a 1999! What a survey
absolutely.
of 1999! And
but it was definitely like my mind was 100% blown, not just because The Matrix is like kind of a mind-blowing movie, but like seeing that movie, because I didn't see it in theaters, but the very first time I saw it was on DVD. It was just like, oh my God, it's the clearest picture I've ever seen.
Yeah, that was so mind-blowing at the time. I mean, people don't appreciate that now, but it's like,
no,
everything looked like shit our whole lives, and then like someone just flipped the switch and it looked okay, and then it looked a little better,
kids,
and now it looks too good, and it's like, okay, let's make this a little shittier and
scale it back. Not everything needs to be in 8K.
No,
get out of here. I also have heard that human eyes cannot distinguish a difference between, is it anything above 8K, like our eyes can't distinguish, especially if it's in like a room, like maybe like in a huge theater, you can tell the difference, but in your own home, like there's no reason to get above a 4K TV because it's just like your eye, it will not make a demonstrable difference to your eyes.
Well, actually, that's funny because like when we were mixing and doing the sound design for Delicate Arch, they the guys at Melody Gun, who were our post sound house, were kind of giving me a rundown in sort of the aural version of that. It's like, sub frequencies below whatever hertz aren't even perceptible really. So it's like we don't need to put those in. And
Mm,
because I had ideas like, oh, let's have this like really low rumble, we'll build tension. It's like that would be a waste of time. It's not even perceptible to a human being.
mm.
So yeah, there's sensory stuff like that, and it's just the technology can go beyond like what our faculties are as humans, which is pretty impressive, and it's like a little scary too.
Yeah. Um, one of the things in your film is that there are different realities. I don't want to, give away too much, but each of those realities is sort of represented by a different format, like video format. How did you decide what cameras to use for which of those? Because there's 3 different realities, or maybe 4. I can't remember offhand, but I think there's at least 3.
Yeah, there are 3 primary ones. And and we call them the alpha, beta, and zeta realities as we were kind of producing the film to distinguish between them. But um, it's all informed by the story. It's not just um, stylistic flourish for the sake of stylistic flourish. Um, the sort of base reality, which is what we call the alpha reality, that's just kind of shot on a red, and it's basically a traditional cinematic presentation. So it looks like a movie essentially. And then one of the sort of hero props within the film is this old VHS camera, because one of the characters' grandfather was a news reporter, and this is a leftover memento from those days. And so he's constantly recording stuff with this VHS camera. So that is sort of a degraded. We actually shot with mini DV, but it's supposed to kind of represent like VHS or perhaps even beta. So we actually had to degrade it from mini DV down to something even a little more primitive. And then and this is a contemporary story, so the kids are all recording everything that they're doing on their phones, and so we see that presented as well, and that those sort of bits that are recorded vertically on the phone, they're also mediated by filters and um, filters that kind of blur the line between like, is this happening in their reality, or is this just like something they turned on their phone? That's all kind of part of the texture of the film and the different realities being blurred and interacting with each other.
Yeah, it's a really fun aesthetic, and especially once the psychotropics start to kick in, like we get a lot of really interesting visuals there too. So, if you are in the LA area, I would highly recommend checking out Delicate Arch at Dances with Films, which is a really good film festival too.
Yeah, they're great.
Go see other stuff there, but let's talk a little bit about how you and I first got acquainted. We have mutual friends, but I can't remember. I was writing a column called Awesomely Bad Movies for an a site called Modern Primate, which I also don't think exists anymore.
Yeah, that was all part of the same media conglomerate that
Right.
ran out of gas a while ago. But yeah, we I think we met at a live show for the podcast Battleship Pretension, which we're both
Yes.
friends of and fans of, I would say.
Hmm.
And I remember like after one of those shows, we all went to El Compadre on Sunset, and I think you and I ended up sitting next to each other. We just started like bullshitting, and I was like, "Oh, this guy is on my level. Seems like we could be friends."
It's always nice to
And
hear.
yeah, and then from there, I became a fan of your online writing, and and when I was sort of doing some editorial work at this site, Modern Primate, I sort of asked you if there's anything you'd like to do, and you came up with the Awesomely Bad Movies blog pitch, and we said, great. We started running that, and then we eventually converted that into a video series that we shot in the very loft I'm sitting in right now.
Yeah, it was, which was super fun. I really love doing those. I think it's so funny what like looking back on those now because the first few we did were like 5-ish minutes, and then it was like, oh well, videos need to be shorter than that, and then we went them down to like 3 minutes or whatever.
Hmm.
And nowadays it's like if it's under 8 minutes, you may as well not even bother. It's just so funny how it
I
changed.
I know it was crazy. Everything for like so. I haven't worked in that sort of new media for like about a decade. But for the longest time in the early 2010s, I would say it's like people have no attention span at all. You got to make this shorter. The shorter, the better. And now everything that's successful is either just like video of like a live streamed podcast or Twitch thing, or like a long like exegesis on like some video essay exegesis on like some crazy thing.
And they all do really well, and they all make a ton of money off of ads and stuff, and it's just really funny to see how that, because the I'll call it the nadir, but like Vine was like 7 seconds. That's like
Mhm.
they determined that is what people's attention spans are, and now it's completely the opposite direction. And TikToks can go on for like individual videos can be however long, but like TikTok threads can be hours long sometimes. And it's so funny. This is what people do nowadays is they just watch 4-hour videos, me included.
Yeah.
I will sometimes watch 4-hour long videos.
Well, I always thought like if our videos were like the length of a song, that would be like
Mm.
good. Then that's like a complete experience. So yeah, maybe that's an awkward amount of time that people don't really create stuff in anymore. That sort of 3.5 to like 5-6 minute range.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean you can. People do it, but just we learned here at Nerdist, we have learned that if it's under 8 minutes, it's not going to make any money. You have to be 8:01 in order to get an ad break.
Oh,
That's
interesting.
behind the curtain, everybody listening. That's why videos are longer, is because you get more ad breaks.
Well, there you go.
Um there you go. They're also fun. They're also fun to kind of just like delve into something for
Yeah,
a
and
long period of time.
you can watch them on your TV now and stuff. So it's just
Yeah.
programming.
But we did some really fun like movies. We did Star Crash, which was the first one we did, which is one of my favorite crappy Italian movies.
Hmm.
We did we did some newer ones. I think there was a period of time when it was like we need to do because we were doing very esoteric old movies. Like let's feed the algorithm a little bit. So we did like Taken 3 and what was that movie with Guy Pearce?
Oh,
Um
Space Jail, whatever the real name of it
yeah,
is.
Space Jail,
I
whatever that was
forget.
called.
Yeah.
It was basically Escape from New York, but in space jail,
Hmm.
where he had to go in and save the president's daughter. It's exactly the same, except it's a jail on a satellite.
Yeah, I
Um,
think we did some newer ones, but then I don't think either one of us enjoyed doing those as much as like the old
no.
ones like the Burning or Cobra or
Hmm.
was it what was I really like the one, what was it, Forbidden Planet, Forbidden World? Which one
Forbidden
was that?
World.
Forbidden World, yeah.
Yeah, the alien
Uh,
ripoff.
mhm.
Yeah. We did one of the Godzilla movies. We did Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. We
Mhm.
did, oh man, we did a lot. I think we ended up doing what, like 15 or so, maybe even more than that.
I think we did almost
Um,
20. And you can still
yeah,
find all of these on a playlist if you just search awesomely bad movies on YouTube, you'll find them. So they're still there.
yeah, they were super fun. We had, like Matt said, we shot them all in his loft in Long Beach, and we his cat would show up quite a few times.
Yeah, my
That was
cat
fun.
Oscar, who's unfortunately no longer with us, but he
Oh, I'm
lives
sorry to
on.
hear that. I loved Oscar.
I know, I know.
Oscar the One-Eyed Wonder Cat.
Yeah, Oscar the One-Eyed Wonder Cat lives on though in these awesomely bad movies, videos, sort of uh,
Yeah, who would
video bombing
constantly ruin
Kyle.
takes by jumping on my
Yeah,
shoulder.
yeah, yeah. He was
He was
an
great.
attention hog.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, so if you want to see, I was going to say something weird. I'm gonna say it anymore. I'll say it. If you'd like to see a now dead cat, you should watch videos.
I mean, there are lots of
Uh,
ways to see now dead cats. I'd say
mhm.
any piece of media featuring a cat that's more than 20 years old, that cat is probably dead. And so
Absolutely.
this is just another way to see a currently dead cat.
Just one of many
Yeah,
ways.
that's our topic
Um,
today, right?
Yeah, now dead cats. Yeah.
Yeah, how to watch videos of deceased cats.
I would bet most cats that are on YouTube are no longer with us. I'm going to just say, having
That's an
done
interesting
absolutely no
thought.
research into this.
Yeah. It's like how they say like oh, was this like a thing in Fight Club where it was like studio audience like clapper or clapping and laughter for sitcoms? It was all recorded in the 50s and all those people are dead now. So you're just hearing dead people laugh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was Fight Club. Seems like a Polynician nihilistic thing to put in a book.
Yeah. Just like it's a true thing, but it's like, did we all need to know this? Thanks, Chuck.
Yeah.
So yeah, but those are super fun. Yeah, please check those out on YouTube if you want to see me make jokes. So yeah, we're going to talk about the James Bond franchise, which I think that and comic books and Swamp Thing especially, like, were two of the things that we talked about a lot.
Yeah, I see all your Swamp
and
Things behind you on the shelf.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I got all my comic books behind me and Swamp Things front and center. Yeah,
if there was a pie,
we like.
I was going to say, if there's a pie chart, Kyle, of our conversations, I think it would be like there would be a big slice that was Swamp Thing. There would be a big slice that was James Bond. There would be a big slice that's the Clippers, and then I don't know, like just bitching about our lives, our horrible lives, would maybe be the remaining pie chart.
Is that what we did?
Well, we catch up.
Did you say lives or wives?
No, lives, LIVE.
Okay, good. I was
we both have lovely, charming wives who are too good for us.
Yes. Absolutely. I was like, you will not besmirch the name of Stephanie Anderson.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Both of them. They're here. We talked a lot about James Bond, and luckily, like, there were just so many James Bond movies coming out, and it's sort of an interesting time for the franchise because they are still planning to make more. But I am not entirely sure that we are, like, I think James Bond as an idea might be kind of by the wayside, and I think the more, not to say that there aren't any good movies after a certain point, because I think at least 2.5 of the Craig movies are very good. But I think, like, to me, the most fun version of it is the 60s version. Like, 60s spy stuff is just super fun. And yes, those movies are very problematic today, which is obviously something to get into. And the books are even more so. But I just think it's sort of
one problematic thing in one Ian Fleming book. Like,
okay,
the entire chapter of Live and Let Die.
Live and Let Die. Yeah. I think it's chapter 2 or 3 in Live and Let Die has a word that we're not allowed to say. No, it's right there. It's right there.
Well,
so what's your
yeah, that's the thing. It's like, I mean, for 50, 60 years, whatever, but when there have been these kind of lulls between Bonds or these long gaps between films, people have said exactly what we're saying now. It's like, well, I don't think this is like a relevant idea to what's, what our current culture is at and what the appetite of consumers is. But like, maybe we're all right this time. Maybe it is like no longer relevant.
Yeah.
But it's like people have said that and consistently been wrong for decades and decades. And so it feels very true to me, but people have preceded me in this opinion have been proved wrong. So I don't know. I'm not very good at prognosticating like what the appetite for a media property like that is going to be moving into the future.
Yeah, I think I never underestimate the desire for people who like making lots of money to want to continue to keep making lots of money. Also, we are at a time where franchise movie making is kind of the only thing that gets cash, and like name recognition is what people are. I won't say it's what people want to watch. That's not necessarily true. It's what studios think is a sure bet. So they are willing to put money behind it. And I think, especially now that Amazon owns the MGM library. I think they are
Mhm.
being like, come on, give us money, um, but it's like the idea of a spy. I mean, I think honestly, the best idea would probably be to like set it in the 60s and like go, maybe not, don't necessarily redo any of the movies. You can, but like that's way more fun because like, I don't know if you saw Guy Ritchie's The Man from Uncle, which was set in like the late 60s, or no, it was, yeah, early 60s, something like that. It was
Mhm.
Cold War era. And that movie is just super fun and stylish. And I wish I liked Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare more, which was set during World War II. But um, I just think that inherently, OSS or like MI6 kind of Cold War era spy stuff needs to be set in that era because right now, I mean, they were really stretching the limits of what was relevant in the later Craig movies, and I think they dealt with it directly with Spyfall, but that was 12 years ago when
Mhm.
Skyfall. Spyfall is the name of the
That's
Doctor Who episode that is parodying it.
oh, okay. I was gonna say that would be a Leslie
Skyfall.
would be like a Leslie Nielsen. That's like
If
the
he was
Weird
still
Al
alive, they would have made a movie
parody
called
of
Spyfall.
Skyfall. Yeah. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
well, I think I don't think they'll ever do it because they want it to be relevant to
right.
or what would think is relevant, but I think that would be the way to do it, and there's great material there, like, I've read about exactly half of the original Fleming books as well, and there's, um, uh, you know, I think a film adaptation of the actual book Moonraker would be incredible.
Yeah,
Because that's by far the best James Bond book that I've read. Um, and it'd be a very different. It's. I don't think they would ever do that one because I think like the brand Moonraker is sort of poisoned from the people's recollection of the film. I guess you could call it something else. You probably have to. Um, and then it doesn't have a lot of what we think of as like the traditional Bond hallmarks. Like it's not globetrotting. It all takes place in England. It's very just sort of just kind of corporate espionage, really, um, and and all very analog. And that's the other thing too with where I think the benefit of doing something period would really come through is that like computers and like modern tech and stuff like it's just like not fun. It's like not as fun as like the little analog gadgets of the previous generations. And I think even by the time you're getting to a lot of the Pierce Brosnan stuff in the '90s, it's like I don't know, shitty like computer readouts of stuff, and it just kind of like sucks and is boring.
yeah. And just the idea of like a lone agent doing all these things with gadgetry and stuff like that is kind of, it's all drones. I mean, everything's drones these days.
Yeah,
I'm like,
like
how
a
old
truly
am I?
accurate
Um,
modern James Bond would just be him sitting in like a shipping container in the Nevada desert, just like playing video games, like dropping bombs on
yeah,
on like North Korean black sites or whatever.
yeah. Like spying is so much different, like y- than what it was, and I think like it's so much more fun to watch those old movies because he can pretend to be somebody else, or like even though he didn't ever really do that, but like um and the more that the series had to kind of steer into the advancements in technology, the kind of more outlandish and ludicrous it started to look. And um like Die Another Day, I think, is one of the worst, definitely bottom 3 Bond movies, but it was like, let's just, it's 2002, let's be super high tech, and it's just like,
Hmm.
this is not cool. um I think, yeah, at one point he what is it, windsurfs on a quickly
I believe
a
it's
quickly melted glacier.
yes. He windsurfs on a glacier, and I think has an invisible car. So
He does,
um,
yeah.
now I think those are actually. I think the glaciers. I think you want to talk about relevance. I think like the glaciers are melting rapidly, and I don't think we're too far away from like an invisible Cybertruck or whatever. So maybe that's more. Maybe there's more foresight and vision in Die Another Day than we're giving it credit for. But I agree with you. That's like definitely one of the worst James Bond movies.
What was your kind of history with James Bond as a franchise? I'm assuming I know the answer to this, but you watched the movies before you read the books. So like, what was kind of your history with the movies?
Yeah, uh, I so my dad was like a big James Bond fan, so we
I think
would
all dads were.
yeah, because he was born in 1950, and so he would have been the exact right age when those early when the early Connery stuff was first coming out and making waves. And we were not like really a family that went to like the movies together. We were tight knit and all that, but like we're in a family that went to the movies together. But I would always go see the new James Bond movie with my dad,
Hmm.
which so like there's kind of the warm fuzzy feelings like that, but and there's also like kind of cringe feelings too because when you're 12 and you're sitting next to your dad and you're like watching like Famke Johnson like strangulate someone with her how blue can we get on this podcast? Not very blue.
There are ways around
I'll
it,
leave
but
it
yeah,
there, but
she,
you know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
yeah,
So
you know the scene.
yeah, it's like watching like the steamy sex stuff, like next to your dad's like. So a mix of cringe and warm and fuzzies, and then um, I think and then kind of always like was interested in what was happening, and then I think like a lot of people, Casino Royale was just like so good that kind of
Hmm.
like made me interested in the character and the franchise again. And then I think a little bit after that, um, that was when podcasts were exploding. There were like a lot of great James Bond podcasts, and I would like basically listen to every single one. And that was really the time when I was going through and kind of like watching them all in order and in like a real academic way, where I was like super paying attention to everything. That's when I started reading the books as well. So I would say it's something that kind of exploded for me, like more so in adulthood than
Hmm.
when I was a kid. Um, but yeah, so it's like as far as obsessions go, it's a fairly like recent one in my life, like last decade, let's say, um,
Hmm.
decade plus. But it is like I've instead of counting sheep at night, I have like these. I just have like topics I like to think about until I get tired and fall asleep, just
I
in
like
an
that.
abstract way.
Hmm.
And I have a handful of different ones. Like one is Metallica. I love like just thinking about Metallica before I fall asleep. And then James Bond is another one. Just think about James Bond when my head hits the pillow until I drift off. Um, so it's a weird part of my life in that way.
I mean, whatever works as long as you go to sleep. That's the best. That's all
Yeah.
you really got to worry about. That's so funny. Yeah, I'm sort of the same. Like I don't think I saw a James Bond movie in theaters until Casino Royale, which I was in college. So um, a bunch of us went to go see that. And it was, but I had seen most of them at that point. Um, there was a period of time when, I mean, they used to be on Spike like every whatever
Hmm.
holiday. They were just like the weekend of James Bond, and so you couldn't help but watch some of those. And then they started putting them out on DVD again, back to DVD, and so I would kind of watch them that way. And um, but like you, like I eventually became like obsessed with like the minutia of them, and like
Hmm.
my friend Lincoln, who was my roommate for a year in college, we would like I think he had a James Bond edition of Seen It, and we
Oh,
both would
cool.
get like it would be like which Bond movie is this from like a frame, and we would
Hmm.
both of us would always get it because it was just
I just played Seen It recently for like the first
like
time in yeah.
yeah, I haven't played it probably since like a decade plus ago.
We were having sort of a kickoff to the summer at Film Independent, where we were doing like a whiskey tasting, and then we were playing Scenic or Scenic Scene It. in the conference room. So, and my team crushed, of course, thanks to me.
Yeah, of course, obviously.
That's my lasting legacy at that company.
Oh, Matt, he was so good at seeing it.
He definitely knew that the name of the song in Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is Orinoco Flow and not Sail Away. So,
I mean, yeah, obviously, it's Orinoco Flow. What is... Well, let's go through each of the Bonds and kind of talk about what they all brought to the table and what the eras are, because it's very convenient actually that most generally each era has its own kind of flavor, if not its own like completely different actor to play James Bond. But so let's start with like the first few Connery ones. They started in 1962 with Dr. No, and then they were yearly after that, and they eventually went to every 2 or every other year, but because Connery got burnt out.
well, that's what is so crazy about that. It's like, and I don't know. Maybe we don't need to tie it back to what we were talking about earlier with things being relevant, but they take such long gaps between these movies now. It's like people are just growing up without James Bond or any sort of James Bond. So you're sort of, eliminating a lot of, when people form these impressionable attachments to pop culture, entire generations are kind of growing up without this character being a part of their imagination. But yeah, I mean the early Bonds. I mean, I think like the purest, and this isn't even my favorite, but I think the purest, like most perfect distillation of what James Bond is Goldfinger, because I think that really is, out of all the 25 films, the only one where it's mature enough. It's the third film, so it's mature enough after 2 films in the franchise to have all of the stuff that they know works about the character in those movies together, in one film. And so it's really the only film where it has basically all of the James Bond tropes, but they're not so self-conscious about it. In fact, they're not really self-conscious about it. I think that's the only one where they really thread the needle, where here are like, the gadgets and the Bond girls and the villain and blah blah blah, like, your list of elements of a James Bond movie that you would tick off, but where they're not like super aware of those being boxes that need to be checked, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that was because after the first 2, and the second one, From Russia with Love, I think is maybe my favorite Bond movie. It's certainly my favorite of the Connery ones. It's just like a super
It's
solid,
a great
like,
movie. That's
yeah,
that is the sort of movie that even if it wasn't James Bond in that movie, and it was like a different character played by I don't know who was an actor around that era who could have played like a spy, but if it was some off-brand thing, it'd still be like a great film that people talk about.
yeah. But that one is very, like, I would say serious for the most part. There's some humor to it, but there's and Goldfinger is the first one that has like, it kind of starts to go a little over the top into, but like you said, it's not self-conscious about it. It has more gadgets, like the car itself is kind of the gadget with the, ejector seat and the machine guns in the front and like all that stuff, which is more high tech and kind of more outlandish than what it is in the second movie, which is just a briefcase that has stuff in it. Which is cool and far more realistic, but like it's pretty straightforward and down the center there. It's the first one where Q, played by Desmond Llewellyn, is like funny and kind of like hits back at James Bond because he's kind of not much of a character in the first or in the second movie. And then you have a very outlandish main villain, which you had in Dr. No, and a very outlandish and memorable secondary villain, which you had in From Russia with Love, both together in the form of Goldfinger and Oddjob, who has a hat who has effectively he has a Peaky Blinder. he's got but he's got a top hat with a razor blade built into it.
The razor blade. Yeah, it's like oh my god, odd job. He has this hat. It's like anyone could get that hat probably. You could have Q make that hat if you wanted it.
Anybody
It's
could,
like
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And it's I feel like I love the scene when he shows it off and he cuts the head off of a statue, which is just such a silly image, but I love it. But it still has very much like the kind of slow pace of some of those other movies at times where like he
Mhm.
has a whole golf game against Goldfinger where like Goldfinger's cheating and like all this stuff. And it's
And honestly, like, so I was talking about how I've read about half the books. Where I
Mhm.
fell off was during that golf sequence in the book Goldfinger, because
It is pretty boring. I agree.
I think it's like I think it's based on like some actual like famous game of golf that
Mm.
Ian Fleming cared about, I guess. But it's like an entire 18-hole golf game that he writes about, like like stroke by stroke. It's like it's I don't know. It's like almost psychotic, but
Yeah.
and so that's like where I stopped reading James Bond, the books, and I was
Yeah.
like,
I
I
have
can't make
not.
it. I can't make it through this golf game.
Yeah, it's that is about where I fell off on the books too. But I think overall, and then of course you have stuff that is a hallmark of the series, which are kind of questionable misogyny in it. Nowadays,
Name
it's
one instance of that.
well, first of all, her name's Pussy Galore, and in the book, it's
Hmm.
much more explicit. It is sort of only just implied in the film, but in the book, she is a lesbian who just needs a man as virile and forceful as James Bond to force her back into heterosexuality. It's very offensive, honestly. In the movie, she's just kind of a I mean, she wears a pantsuit, so maybe she is coded as a lesbian, but she's still whatever. She's sort of like, I don't need anyone, I'm independent. And
Hmm.
then of course he effectively uh you know there's the line between welcome advances and assault, and I am not entirely sure that it ever falls on the right side of that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
um
and obviously if in like if you're the kind of person where that sort of uh that sort of anachronistic stuff in a movie, you can't create the space for in the context of it being fantasy and of it being period and of it being like a weird wish fulfillment. Um, so which admittedly is like a lot of allowances you need to make for those films, but and I don't
yeah
fault anyone for not being able to make those allowances, but um, yeah, you just kind of have to uh, decide whether or not you're going to be okay with that stuff or not, particularly in the early stuff.
yeah he's I mean, and Connery himself was super misogynist. Uh Read some of that stuff out there. So it's a tough ask, I think, for people nowadays, but it is something that like up until maybe a decade or so ago, I never thought twice about, because it was not that I didn't realize that it was wrong, but it was just like that's what movies do. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like it was just kind of a thing in movies, especially action movies and especially
Hmm.
these kind of James Bond movies. And now looking back, it's like, oh boy, this was you did a lot of bad stuff in those. But um the next one after that is Thunderball, which you don't like at all. You have I tell everybody your rule about the movie, what
Yeah.
a movie has to have and not have for you to enjoy it.
So my rule of thumb with the James Bond movies is I like any of them with skiing and stuff in the snow, and I dislike any of them that take place underwater or have lots of underwater stuff. And a few of them have both. I think Live in no, For Your Eyes Only has both. Maybe I think.
Yeah, Furious
Uh,
only has both, I believe.
yeah, but yeah, ski like the Drake meme where I'm like skiing, yes, uh, underwater stuff, no.
Yeah.
The Hotline Bling meme.
And Thunderball, I'm not from New York. Thunderball has a lot of underwater. The entire climax is all underwater stuff with just, I mean, John Barry's score is going insane and it's great, but it, you can hardly tell who's who because they actually shot it all underwater with real divers and stuff. And so it's sort of like, wait, who am I supposed to be like rooting for and against? Are any of these people James Bond? Like, it's really hard to tell even what's going on. And it lasts for a good, like 15 minutes.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing with being underwater is you move slowly, and that's, counter to what we think of as good action cinema.
Yeah.
When these people are having spear fights, like hand to, or like just hand to hand combat, like on the ocean floor, and it's like moving at 0.5 speed. It's or
Yeah.
lower. It's like, ugh. But I will say, I think the Thunderball theme song by Tom Jones is really cool, and the unused alternate Thunderball theme song by Johnny Cash rules. It rips.
That's interesting. I don't think I've ever heard the Johnny Cash one. I'll have to track that down immediately after we finish recording. But there's an interesting sort of almost, which is not 100% across the board, but like often the best James Bond songs are in the least good James Bond movies.
Mm-hmm.
It has happened more than a few times. And I think Thunderball is a good example. That song slaps and the movie is very dull. Also, a funny thing about that movie, I am convinced that the writer of that one, who I think Richard Maibaum wrote all or most of them, but Thunderball specifically had a lot of Kevin McClory stuff. Look out, Kevin McClory. He sued
this is a whole
them.
James Bond tangent that we could really get.
It's a whole, yeah, it's a whole thing. Look it up real fast. Thunderball. But so that's the movie that caused a lot of the issues. But so Richard Maibaum wrote the final screenplay, but it also had John Hopkins, not of the hospital, and Jack Whittingham, and then the story by Kevin McClory and Ian Fleming. But I am positive they just made up the term "by the way," because there's a stretch in the movie early on where James Bond says "by the way" in consecutive sentences, and it's just like, did you just hear this phrase for the first time? Like, it's brand new slang. We got to put it in this movie. I just am like, it drives me nuts. I hate repeated phrases that are not intentional. You know what I mean? Like, are not.
Yeah.
And that's just something my brain always picks up on. And so, yeah, that's a. So go back and watch that movie you don't like and tell me about this thing.
Okay.
If you've noticed it as well.
One other thing about the theme song I wanted to add is I saw Tom Jones play that live once. It was super cool.
Oh, wow. That would be, yeah.
Yeah, I went to a Morrissey. I mean, speaking of problematic faves, I went to a Morrissey show.
Yeah.
And Tom Jones was the opener, and he sang that song. So it was interesting. But I do think one redeeming thing about Thunderball is I think it has two of the most attractive Bond girls in it, Fiona Volpe and Domino.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Claudine Auger, is that her name? Claude, whatever. The French actress. And then I literally brought it up on IMDb. Why don't I just look? Try not to remember. Claudine Auger plays the main Bond girl Domino, and then Luciana Paluzzi plays Fiona Volpe, who is the bad one. And then also this the villain, I guess, in this one is Largo, as played by Adolfo Celi, who is the visual whatever model for number 2 in the Austin Powers movies.
Oh,
if you watch I think I saw or paid attention to the Austin Powers movies and then went back and watched all the Connery Bonds and was just like, oh, I see. I see where all this came from.
Yeah. So
and
yeah, then,
that's
and then things get a little and then there's You Only Live Twice after that, which I think is like, I once broke down on Twitter. I broke down all the James Bond movies in like different categories, and one of them was like dumb but fun. I think You Only Live Twice is like a quintessential dumb but fun James Bond movie. And then after that, things get weird where we kind of go back and forth between Bonds a little bit.
Yeah. You Only Live Twice is also the first full-bodied, I guess, appearance of Blofeld, which is played by Donald Pleasance. I don't think anybody ever played Blofeld more than once until what's his teeth, Christoph Waltz. Spoilers for Spectre. But that one, just be aware if you haven't watched any of these movies, You Only Live Twice is the one where James Bond has yellow face. Not great.
Oh yeah,
but
it is.
Yeah. Roald Dahl wrote the screenplay for that one.
Oh, cool.
Fun fact.
A totally sane man who never did anything crazy.
Yeah. What I think is very interesting is that You Only Live Twice came out the same year as Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, both based on Ian Fleming novels. Richard Maybaum wrote Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, but Roald Dahl wrote You Only Live Twice. I think that is ridiculous. What a weird factoid. It's like they went, yeah, let's write each other's movies. The ones that everyone would think we should write, let's write the opposite.
Yeah. And the results, that's another good James Bond song, though. The Nancy Sinatra song. It was repurposed as that Robbie Williams song Millennium, which I currently have on a playlist called Start Doing Cocaine in Your 40s. So if people want to look at my Spotify playlist, that's on there.
I mean, words to live by. And also, that's a very interesting choice to put on that particular playlist, a Robbie Williams song. I liked that song when it was out, but
well, yeah, because
it's a very strange choice.
You Only Live Twice, which rips, which is a cool song.
Yeah, that's true. And then, yeah, we have, so Connery, of course, didn't want to do it anymore after that. But they wanted to continue making James Bond movies. And so they did On Her Majesty's Secret Service and got George Lazenby, who is an Australian model who looks a lot like Connery in a lot of ways. And they definitely styled him to make him look as much like Connery as possible. He's not the strongest actor. However, the more and more I watch that movie, and it's sort of become kind of almost cliched at this point to say, but You Only Live Twice is one of the best James Bond movies. It has some of the best action. It's all skiing all the time. It's bobsleds.
Oh yeah, it's bobsleds. It's luges. It's skiing. It's gondolas, and maybe there's a funicular in there. A log flume.
I think so. Maybe
there's a guy in a bear costume. It's basically I mean it's funny because I think I would say Lazenby is maybe my least favorite Bond, but paradoxically that is my favorite Bond movie.
Yeah.
So I think that's like just a real just masterpiece on every level.
Absolutely. And you got Diana Rigg as the woman in it. And it actually has like a story about James Bond. Like it's not just, he beds a bunch of women. I mean, he does, but like he also falls in love with this woman and like marries her at the end, and then Blofeld kills her. And it's just like, it's so tragic. And it's, I think Lazenby, I mean, while again, not the best, he only got the one chance at it because people disliked him so much. And he was kind of an a-hole, I think, about the whole thing.
Have you seen really interesting? Oh yeah, you're about to mention it. Go ahead.
Yeah, Becoming Bond, which is the documentary about him, is really interesting. But they should have given him another chance, but no, they decided to pay Connery crap tons of money to come back for Diamonds Are Forever and have it kind of connect to the one before, but like his performance is not anywhere near as like nuanced. He's basically just like, this is a paycheck and I'm here for the paycheck.
Yeah, that's another dumb but fun for me.
I think I actively dislike Diamonds Are Forever.
Oh, really?
Now we're getting into the period of time in the Bond franchise where I'm like, I'm getting into some actively dislikes, and I don't like Diamonds Are Forever.
Yeah, I'll be with you there in a moment. Well, what is your take on Roger Moore, the Roger Moore era? Now that we're into the 70s here.
Yeah, so Roger Moore, I think, is a good James Bond. I think he's a good James Bond. He's a good James Bond for the era. I do think that at this time they were being like very like the opposite of what Goldfinger was, which is like have all the things in it, but don't wink and don't do it self-consciously. These movies start to really veer into self-consciousness. And I think he kind of fits the kind of upper crust erudite kind of version of James Bond, not the brawler, the way that Connery and later Craig were. He's the the super silliest one, but who also every time one thing I like about all the Roger Moore movies is that M will always ask him, "Hey, do you know about this?" when he comes in for a briefing, and then Bond will know everything and he will be the one to tell us everything, and it's like that is so silly that happens.
He's like a Wikipedia page.
I think but like there's only a couple of his movies that I think are like legitimately great. There's a few dumb but funs. But I think
I would
for
say
sure,
this is the dumb but fun era overall.
this is the dumb but fun era for sure. I mean, the 70s just in general were very silly. What a very silly time. But the first one we have is Live and Let Die, which, we've already sort of mentioned some of the problems. But one thing I do think is really interesting about this period of time is that starting with You Only Live Twice, there were like, and then they kind of stopped with, and then came back, especially for the Moores, is that like what other genres were popping off at the time? Let's incorporate that. What books make the most sense to incorporate into that? So like you have Live and Let Die, which just is a blaxploitation movie that happens to have James Bond as the lead character in it.
Yeah.
Because Shaft and Sweet Sweet Badass Song were like cool movies at the time and were making money, and so they were like trying to garner that sort of success. And you have Yaphet Kotto as the bad guy. What do you think? Do you like Live and Let Die? The song is amazing. Unimpeachable.
I like the Guns N' Roses version particularly. Yeah, I mean, imperfect movie.
Yeah.
A weird movie. It seems weird that they would like give that to Moore to be his first outing, instead of something a little bit more throwbacky, I guess. But yeah, the whole like Moore run, as you say, it's like you can almost just map every film onto the film that it's like trying to emulate. The Man with the Golden Gun is like, they're trying to be a Bruce Lee movie, essentially. And then Moonraker obviously is trying to be Star Wars. And then, and then the blaxploitation thing. And then
some of the ones in the 80s, I think, were like, For Your Eyes Only, I think by that point they were kind of, now we were making Bond movies. Like we're just making James Bond movies. And so they are trying to outdo each other with stunts and stuff like that. Octopussy is almost a, like it's very like soft focus through the entire film, which is a really weird kind of choice. I think aesthetically it's my least favorite just because it's so kind of like gauzy in a weird way.
I think that's the one I have like the dimmest memory
and then you have Moore was getting way too old.
Yeah.
For your from a View to a Kill.
I mean, he was probably like probably like our
like
age,
it's
right?
Tremendously bad.
More was
yeah, that's it.
Well, it's like you see those things online where it's like, oh, this is what like 50 looked like in 1930 or whatever, and it's just like a skeleton with flesh dripping off its bones. It's like, yeah, people hold up better now these days than they used to. Yeah, I mean, he stayed in the role too long, I guess, and then I think they were not really taking themselves too seriously, which has its advantages and its disadvantages. A lot of people, I don't like The Spy Who Loved Me as much as some people. I find that movie's like a little bit too self-conscious and self-referential, and kind of just playing. It's just kind of like a greatest hits James Bond movie. It's like, okay, let's what are 20 scenes that have worked in previous James Bond movies? We'll just rewrite them and hang a little bit of plot on it. But yeah, people like that one. I like other Moores better. I do like For Your Eyes Only quite a bit, even though that's usually tagged as one of the more boring Bond movies.
Yeah, I like that one. That was probably my second favorite. The Spy Who Loved Me is my favorite one. I think that that one is very silly, but also like gets like, I think the plot is interesting. It has Jaws in it, which is arguably the best. I mean, he's the only recurring villain ever, other than Blofeld. and I think Barbara Bach as the the Soviet counterpart, um, Agent Triple X. Get out of here, stupid. Um, but I think overall
Genius.
that movie works for me, and I think For Your Eyes Only is number 2. But it's definitely it's a pyramid. It goes like dumb, 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 pretty good, pretty good, pretty good, dumb, 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 dumb. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
it's like
Mm-hmm.
the two in the middle are my favorite ones, and then the two on either side of those have their 70s dumbness and then their 80s dumbness. Um,
Yeah,
although I do think that
it's a good taxonomy of era specific dumbness. But
yeah,
yeah, that's a good point.
yeah. Um, and then yeah, so he did a bunch, 6, which is a lot. And then we have the 2 Timothy Dalton ones from the 80s, and they're basically The Living Daylights from 87 was just a script for Roger Moore that they kind of had to adapt for Timothy Dalton, because at that point they didn't know, like they had it written for Moore, but then he was like, I'm 57, I shouldn't be doing this anymore. Also, Roger Moore opposite Grace Jones is one of the more I will say unpleasant pairings of Bond and
Yeah, that's a pairing with a bad mouthfeel, I feel like.
yeah, it doesn't work for me. I'm like, what is she doing with him? Get out of here. Um
My
but yeah, The Living
recollection
Daylights I think is, yeah, please.
oh no, I was just going to say that's like another one I think is just kind of like pretty down the middle.
Yeah.
It's like a replacement level James Bond movie. It's neither good nor bad. It's just another kind of playing the hits. I
Yeah,
actually do like License to Kill quite a bit.
me too. Me too.
The one with the deal with that is that it's a really good, almost like we were talking about, some of the other films that really work really well. Like License to Kill is just a very good 80s action movie that just happens to have James Bond as its main character.
Yeah, I think that one was definitely like Miami Vice inspired, because it's quite violent.
Mm-hmm.
Also Bond wears loafers with no socks and no tie. So like right on, he's Don Johnson.
Yeah,
Um
the rules.
but it's about like Mexican drug lords and stuff like that, and so, but it is a good movie, like an 89 for 1989 I think it was really good. However, people didn't really vibe with Dalton, obviously better than Lazenby, but not as well as some of the other ones. So a few years after that we get
I think there's just
Brosnan, and I think
oh, I was just gonna say, I think just like Dalton's Bond is just not very charismatic, which is weird because
yeah,
he's
I
a
think
very
that is a problem.
charismatic actor in other roles and
Yeah.
other performances. But yeah, it's kind of surprisingly kind of flat as Bond.
Yeah, he's a handsome guy, like, and he looks good in the tux and everything. Like, he looks the part. He was somebody, I think they had initially wanted him for, I think when Roger Moore wasn't available, something like that, but he said he was too young, or so, I'm trying to remember like all the ins and outs, but they basically have had like a short list of James Bond actors for a long time. Pierce Brosnan was supposed to take over after Moore, and then he was under contract for Remington Steele, the TV show, and was not allowed to. Um, but I think Dalton was on the docket or the potentials before that even. So it was a whole thing. But when Brosnan finally took over with GoldenEye, they really like, well, first of all, you have Judi Dench coming on as M, which is rad. She's super good. And then, so it's sort of a holdover for the old guard, because like Desmond Llewellyn is still there as Q, and there's a lot of the same, I don't know, beats, but they're really trying to be like, these are 90s movies. Let's actually like contend with what the politics of the 90s are like. And so you have a very like behind the Iron Curtain style story taking place after, the fall of the Berlin Wall and all that stuff. Let's, in terms of the Brosnan movies, I think he's a very good Bond. I like Brosnan as Bond quite a bit. He gets the tone very well.
I agree.
How many of those movies would you say you actually think are good of his 4?
Just one, just GoldenEye.
I think that's the case. I think there are parts of Tomorrow Never Dies and The World Is Not Enough that I like, but overall, I do not think they're good. Michelle Yeoh, of course, is great. And I think Robert Carlyle and Sophie Marceau, for that matter, are really good in The World's Not Enough. And the music
That's true.
or the songs of both of those are dope.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I'll go 1.5. I'll say Goldeneye and about half of The World Is Not Enough. As far as
Yeah.
the good ones, Tomorrow Never Dies, I find dull, and
Mhm.
already talked about Die Another Day.
It's so silly. And they were
Yeah.
actively trying to make it a spin-off for Halle Berry's character, which obviously didn't work. People did not
Mhm.
care for her or that movie. I also think it's particularly cringy nowadays, especially. This was in 2002. The villain was a North Korean guy who undergoes facial reconstructive surgery to look like a white guy. Is that good? I don't think so.
It's not great.
Yeah, it's not
Um,
it's not a particularly nice thing to see on screen, but
yeah,
um
I mean, the biggest thing to come out of that era, I think, was just the GoldenEye game. Um,
yeah, by far.
Arguably, but yeah, I agree. Pierce Brosnan, good Bond, bad movies for the most part. This is the era that I was actually starting to watch Bond movies in each new Bond movie in the theater when it came out. So
Mhm.
I get like I don't really care about nostalgia, but I guess I have a little bit of nostalgic attachment to them in that way. But mostly bad movies that I don't enjoy watching.
Have I ever told you my theory about the way they made The World Is Not Enough? I'm sure I have at some point, but
Oh yeah, is it? Correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but is it that uh like um Dr. Christmas Jones isn't in the script and was just like added on set or something like that?
yes.
Okay.
So the the overall screenplay and structure of The World Is Not Enough, I think, is good. And Bond has to look after Sophie Marceau's character, who is, under attack by Robert Carlyle's character, who is this, scarred guy who got like shot in the head and literally can't feel physical sensations, which is a very James Bondy kind of villain type of thing.
Mhm.
But then as the movie goes on, you find out that she's actually the mastermind behind the whole thing, and she's in it with Robert Carlyle and all this stuff. And she's a really good, heroine or kind of damsel turned villain and everything like that. I think it's a really
Mhm.
interesting story. I have the theory that they went, we can't. Somebody at Sony or somebody, you know what I mean, was like, you
Mhm.
can't only have one Bond girl. You got to have a good one. And they were like, but we're about to shoot, and they're like, nah, I don't care. So they, that's the way the guy talks. Nah, I don't care. You got to put more girls in this. And so they added the character of Professor Christmas Jones, which is insane, played by Denise Richards. Just a crazy casting choice. Who was hot off of Wild Things. So people were like, people guys already think she's hot.
Yeah, known
Um,
90s hottie.
yeah, known, yeah. But if you watch that movie, I think almost across the board, she only has dialogue with Bond, and and she's just kind of there, and she just kind of says things only when Bond is by himself, and then otherwise she just is kind of there, and it feels like she's almost his like imaginary friend. And I think it's a much more interesting movie if you watch it as though Christmas Jones were his
Yeah.
imaginary girlfriend. Like he
That's
needed
sort
to
of like
have a hot lady to talk to.
the Garfield without Garfield version of
Yeah.
James of metaphysical weirdness. Yeah, you might be
It's
right. I mean, bad character, bad character, bad performance, bad character.
yeah. And and like that could have been a pretty like, I mean, it's not a perfect movie just anyway, but um it could have been a pretty serious and like cool action movie, but then they added everything with Christmas Jones, from her name to literally everything she does is like uh, a farce. And they were just like, this needs more comedy and we need one more Bond girl. So they just put it all in this one character.
Yeah, I like
Um,
Topher Grace should do an edit of The World Is Not Enough with no Christmas Jones in it,
well, the
and we'll see
aforementioned
how
Lincoln
good that works.
Hayes, who is a friend of mine, did that already.
Oh,
After I
really?
told him that whole thing, well,
Oh, yeah. It
he
doesn't
made
have some kind of fun title too. It's like
yeah, Bond Bond Without Christmas or something like that. I forget
yeah.
what it's called, but yeah, you can find that on YouTube. I
Oh,
think
okay.
still.
Well, it's been done. It's been done by Lincoln Hayes.
Yeah, he did it. And then there was after Die Another Day, there was a pretty significant break at that point before Casino Royale, where they actively decided to reboot it. And let's take Bond back to first of all, they got the rights back to Casino Royale, which they didn't have before the book, and so then let's make this the Bourne franchise. Let's make him a
Hmm.
little bit more um you know younger and full of piss and vinegar and all this stuff. And I I think what's really interesting about the 5 movies that Craig made is that through various reasons and shenanigans, always were way delayed between movies. So you have
Hmm.
him being this young, brash new agent in the first one, and then he's like literally over the hill two movies later, and then by the 5th movie, he's just like, you know, spoilers, he dies at the end of that one. And it's just
Yeah.
like it's so fascinating to me to be like, you only made 5 movies. You made less than
Well, yeah. This goes back to my
Roger
thing
Moore.
about them taking such long gaps in between films, which I think is going to be a real problem for the Broccoli's if they can't like find a better workflow for these things. Um,
Yeah.
but I mean, yeah, the Craig era is interesting in that it's just it's like a complete thought from beginning to end.
Hmm.
It basically covers his career as a double O from his first kill to the final kill of himself by a giant fireball on an island. Spoiler alert. Um, and and yeah, it's like Casino Royale is great. Skyfall is great. Spectre is middling, and Quantum of Solace. When I did my list of categories, I had one category that was just called like weird but interesting, and the only film in that category was Quantum of Solace.
Yeah.
That was a real just I don't know what I'm watching, but like not in a bad way.
That was an interesting one because that one was made during the writer's strike.
The first writer
Um,
strike, or
the
the
first writer's
previous
strike,
writer strike. Yeah.
um, which was 2007, I think. Um, and so yeah, it was sort of like it's the shortest Bond movie, I think, by far, and it can't. So what they couldn't do with adding story or fixing story, they made up for by adding more chase sequences. It's like
Hmm.
basically 5 extended chase sequences with dialogue scenes in between.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's very tied to the plot of Casino Royale. I mean,
yeah.
all the Craig films are pretty intertwined with each other, but that it almost feels like when they made Anchorman, they made that whole like separate movie, separate
Hmm.
Anchorman that was just like stuff they didn't use in the first Anchorman. That's kind of like what Quantum of Solace feels like to me. It's just uh like spare footage. I know it's not, but it feels kind of just like spare footage that was cut out of Casino Royale.
Yeah, I have a weird. That one I saw in the theater. I think it was one of the first or early movies I saw when I moved here, or maybe I'd already lived here for a little while. I don't actually remember, but um, it was sort of like special to me in that way. But even at the time, I was like, this is not like super high art or anything like that. It doesn't hold a candle to Casino Royale, which is um, one of the very best. And then Skyfall, which they made in 2012 to celebrate the 50th anniversary, is so my shit. It's like not even funny.
Hmm.
Love it so much.
Yeah,
I
that
think I
one's
saw
a
it
real
3 or 4
triumph.
times in theaters, which is unheard of for me. I don't go to the theater. I don't repeat stuff in theaters very often.
Yeah. No, I mean that's just top tier Bond. And it's an old movie now, so you can't even blame recency bias, but I think that's definitely like um a top 3 Bond movie probably.
Hmm.
Um and I think like really carried the Craig Bond in the public's imagination through like the next two movies, which I don't think were as good.
No. Yeah, Spectre I think is like overblown in a lot of ways. It has some good action in it for sure. And it looks great. Skyfall and Spectre were both directed by Sam Mendes, and he employed Roger Deakins, who I believe he didn't win an Oscar. He was nominated for an Oscar for Best Cinematography for Skyfall, and then Hoyte van Hoytema, who was basically
Nolan's
the
guy.
Dutch, the Dutch Roger Deakins for Spectre.
He's one of Nolan's guys, right?
He is, yeah. He shot
Yeah.
Interstellar and I think Oppenheimer as well, possibly. Yeah, he did. He just won an Oscar, Kyle. Dumb. Anyway, they look really good, both of them. But Spectre also like looks super, super good. But all of the stuff, they had just gotten the rights back to Blofeld. Again, if you look up the Kevin McClory stuff, they had just gotten the rights back to Blofeld, so they wanted to put him in the movie. But then they were like, how do you make Blofeld, who is this kind of over-the-top, ridiculous supervillain, how do you fit that into this very grounded or semi-more grounded James Bond version? And I don't think they did a good job. Like, suddenly he has this older brother that we've never heard of. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's real
just
corny,
to be
like
Blofeld.
soap opera stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so disappointing too, because a good character as far as this type of character goes, and a good actor, and they just really, they didn't incorporate it well, and then they did the thing where it's like, oh, I've been pulling the strings the whole
which
time,
I can't stand. I
like
truly
sort
can't
of
stand it.
Retroactively kind of devalues how good the previous villains were in the other Craig movies. And I think that movie's like, I think that movie in general is sort of replacement level, but the fact that the Blofeld stuff was incorporated so poorly takes it slightly below replacement level.
Yeah. And then it's just like there's only one more movie with him in it afterwards, and it feels like, and first of all, he's barely in it. He's barely in No Time to Die, and then he gets shot in the one scene that he's in, or one of the couple scenes he's in. So it's like, what a waste of Blofeld. You like didn't do anything with him. Like, we didn't have the time to be like, this is Ernst Stavro Blofeld, like the bad guy of the James Bond saga. And yeah, it was unfortunate. And I liked a good amount of No Time to Die. I like that it kind of comes full circle. He has that whole action sequence with Anna de Armas's character, and he doesn't hit on her at all. He's basically just like, hey, you're great. Good job. All that stuff, which is like, hey, he's finally come around, like all this stuff. Because he's...
Yeah. I think there's just too much movie there.
There's too much movie.
Yeah. They need to put that movie on a diet.
Yeah, it's a bit sweaty, that movie. And I also think that like the villain played by Rami Malek is so boring. Like, he's just Bond villain.
Yeah, it's a very just like you tell Midjourney to create a Bond villain.
Yeah,
and that's what it spits out. So it's weird though. It's weird seeing James Bond die. It's kind of, I had the same feeling that I had at the end of The Dark Knight Rises, where Batman like retires. Basically, it's like you grow up with these characters, and they're just sort of open-ended characters whose adventures in your mind just keep going and going, and never like are approaching an actual like final denouement or anything. And in both those movies, it's like, oh, it's weird to like see Batman or James Bond kind of reach the end of their story. I'm not used to that.
No, and yeah, Batman obviously doesn't have as many movies as James Bond, but it's the same thing where you're like, no, just keep changing the actor. It doesn't need to be different every time. But both of them were very much like, these are their self-contained versions. And I actually think like, as good as the movies in both the Nolan Dark Knight trilogy and the Craig Bond, what is it? Quintology, I guess.
Yeah. What did Alien come up with when they did that?
Well, quadrilogy, which is not a thing. It's, tetralogy is the correct term for 4, but now there's more Alien movies, so who knows? But I think like I was saying, for as good as some of the movies in those are, it kind of takes away the mystique of their respective, like, mythical characters too much. Like it strips them down too much and they become just guys. And like Batman doesn't work if he's just a guy. You know what I mean? Like he kind of has to have the theatrics. That's why to me, like The Batman with Robert Pattinson worked better as a Batman story. Your mileage may vary if you think it's a better film than some of the Nolan ones, but I think as a Batman or as a representation of Batman and Gotham City on screen, that does really well. But like as much as I loved Skyfall, I don't necessarily think that that's James Bond. I think that's Daniel Craig James Bond. You know what I mean? Like
interesting. Yeah. So I guess we could say like, because like viewed through that rubric, Casino Royale is like maybe similar to Goldfinger in that it's like it is James Bond, it is Daniel Craig, it all kind of works and it's kind of pure in a really effective way.
Yeah. What are your top 5 James Bond movies?
I would say On Her Majesty's Secret Service, number 1 with a bullet. I would say I'm going to go From Russia with Love. I will go Goldfinger. Gosh, I hope. I feel like it's just going to be like. I'll do GoldenEye. And I'll do now I don't have any Craigs, damn it. And I'll do Casino Royale, I guess. So that's 5.
That is 5. I would personally, I mean, that's effectively my 5 as well. I would swap Goldfinger to me, I like, but I don't like as much as a lot of people do. So I would swap that with Skyfall, but otherwise lockstep. But I do like it. Like Goldfinger would be number 6. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not.
I like Goldfinger now because it's partially set in Kentucky, which is where I'm moving. So I gotta rep the hometown now.
Yeah, are you just gonna go hang out at Fort Knox, which doesn't look like that at all, by the way?
Dude, I've applied for jobs at Fort Knox. They never got back to me. They know I'm gonna steal all their gold.
No, of course not.
Or I'm gonna turn it into lead or whatever, so my gold is more valuable, or whatever the plot of that movie was. Something like that.
Yeah, the plot makes no sense. There's a huge amount of that movie where like Bond is overhearing an entire like plot that Goldfinger tells a bunch of mob bosses, and then none of them want to do the thing, and so he just kills them all. And it's like, so why did you tell them that? Why didn't you just kill them?
Like, I mean, with a few exceptions, like From Russia with Love, like the actual plots of Bond movies are mostly just total nonsense.
Yeah. But. What are your favorite Bond songs?
God, I really do love "You Only Live Twice." I might put that at the top. I just find that like a really haunting song. I'll do "Live and Let Die," parentheses, Guns N' Roses version.
Okay.
I'll do Skyfall. It's a good one. I will do the Garbage Song from The World Is Not Enough.
That song.
And that leaves me one more, right?
Yeah.
I'll do. I guess I'll do. I'll do the Aha song.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I do like that song. "The Living Daylights" is a good song.
Yeah, I think just for some variety. Yeah, you
have left Duran Duran off your list.
Well, in my mind, I was like going back and forth. That long pause was me. Was Duran Duran and Aha wrestling in my head, because those two are pretty interchangeable. But I'll go with Aha.
Nice, I like it. I think I go again pretty similar. I like the song Goldfinger. It just makes me laugh. Live and Let Die, Skyfall, The World's Not Enough, and View to a Kill, which is the Duran Duran song.
I'll do an honorable mention.
There's some
Diamonds Are Forever too. It was a good one.
Yeah, another Shirley Bassey.
Yeah, and of course
Moonraker.
Kanye used that to great effect in his unproblematic era, or at least the normal
Less
amount of
problematic era.
Yeah.
He's never not been problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, like we were saying earlier, I think the future of James Bond is sort of up in the air. They do want to make more, but again, like they're going to have to really revamp what a James Bond movie is, and will people accept drastic changes?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we'll see. Like people are pretty awful when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah, fans are the worst. Fans are just the worst things out there. So,
and we're talking about you specifically at home.
Mm-hmm.
Just kidding. Just kidding.
I'm not kidding. I truly believe
that. You can email Matt at immovingtokentucky@gmail.com. Matt, how can people get a hold of you and your work on the internet should you choose for them to do so?
Yeah, I have an Instagram, which is MPM Warren. That is also my Letterboxd. I do a lot of letterboxing.
Mm-hmm.
And then my movie is Delicate Arch, which is at Delicate Arch Pick on Instagram and delicatearchfilm.com. And Kyle, thank you so much for letting me do this.
Absolutely. That was a super fun discussion. I'm very excited for people to go and see your movie. You can get tickets to Delicate Arch, which again is screening Friday, June 28th at 9:15 p.m. at the TCL Chinese 6 Theaters. You can get tickets at danceswithfilms.com or .ticketspice.com. I think either way is fine. And then find Delicate Arch there. It's a really fun time. I'm not just saying that because you're my friend, but I am saying that because you showed it to me early because I am your friend.
And also you read the script and gave notes on it, so there's a tiny percentage of your authorship in there as well.
Just small percent. But I've told people after the last screening that you had, or that I went to anyway, that it was so kind of what was on the screen was on the page already. So like it's a very it read exactly the way I expected it to look, and vice versa. So cool. Anyway. Thank you all for listening. Thank you again, Matt, for joining me.
Thank you, Kyle.
And I will, I've been Kyle Anderson. Join me again next week on Laser Focus when my guest will be a different person. Bye-bye. Laser Focus is a production of Nerdist Industries and Legendary Digital Networks. It was produced, edited, and hosted by me, Kyle Anderson. For more, visit nerdist.com.